The glass walls of the executive conference room glinted with the soft gray light of a Seattle morning as I stepped inside. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, but the air in the room was unnervingly still. Two people were already seated at the table. Marjorie Lang, my direct supervisor, and Denise from Human Resources, both with identical expressions of carefully rehearsed corporate regret. I knew exactly what this was. "Elaine," Marjorie began, folding her hands neatly in front of her, "after 22 years with Noviaxis, we've made the difficult decision to restructure your position." She said it like she was sorry, but she wasn't. I could hear it in the tremble that wasn't quite sorrow. It was satisfaction, barely masked behind her polished tone. "We're moving in a more agile, forward-thinking direction," Denise added, sliding a manila folder toward me as if it contained anything more than a 2-week severance per year and a reminder that my time here no longer held value. "Your contributions have been appreciated, but the company is changing." I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked at them both and offered a measured nod. "I understand." A flicker of confusion passed over Marjorie's eyes. Denise shifted slightly in her seat, as if bracing for protest. They were expecting shock, tears, indignation. Instead, I sat there composed, calm, because the truth was, I had known this moment was coming. 3 weeks ago, a misrouted internal email had landed in my inbox, a thread between Marjorie and the executive team titled Q for Leadership Realignment. I wasn't meant to see it, of course, but I did. And in that moment, I saw everything clearly. My time at Noviaxis wasn't being evaluated, it was being erased. Marjorie cleared her throat. "We'd like you to return your laptop, keycard, and company phone by Friday. Your team will be notified this afternoon. We've prepared a transition plan." My team, 6 brilliant minds I had personally recruited, trained, and led for years. Together, we'd built the data engine that powered ClearGrid, the company's flagship financial analytics tool used by over 200 banks across the country. The very heart of Noviaxis' success. And now they were cutting out the person who'd created it. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice steady. The question seemed to unnerve them more than anything. Marjorie blinked. "No, that's all. Thank you for being professional." Professional. I nearly laughed. I stood, gathered the untouched folder, and offered a small, courteous smile. "Then I'll begin clearing my office." As I walked through the halls of the 34th floor, my heels echoing across polished marble, I caught glimpses of my colleagues behind glass walls. Some looked up with curiosity, others with pity, but no one said a word. Noviaxis was a place where silence was safer than solidarity. Passing by the main conference room, I caught a glimpse of Victor Reynolds, the CEO, gesturing animatedly at a screen, no doubt discussing quarterly projections. The same man who, just last year, stood on stage at a tech summit and presented ClearGrid as our team's proudest achievement, conveniently omitting my name. I reached my office, shut the door behind me, and finally exhaled. Then, from my personal phone, I sent a single message. "It's done. Friday's the last day." The reply came almost instantly. "Perfect. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details." I looked at the framed photo on my desk, me and my team at last year's holiday party, everyone smiling, unaware of the storm that was coming. My hand lingered for a second on the coffee mug they'd gifted me, the brain behind the grid. That was what they used to call me. And now the company thought they could remove me like a worn-out cog in a shiny machine. They had no idea that by Friday I wouldn't just walk out quietly. I'd take their future with me, because what they didn't know was that I'd already built something better. It started with a ping, just a soft notification at the bottom corner of my screen. Q for Leadership Realignment. At first, I thought it was another department-wide memo, but as I clicked and scrolled, the blood drained from my face. This wasn't meant for me. The thread spanned 12 replies. Names I knew too well: Victor, Marjorie, Denise, and the entire executive team. And me, not included in the conversation, but very much the subject of it. She's a legacy player, but not scalable. Her leadership style is dated. We need to position younger, more dynamic talent as the future. I read those words 3 times before closing my laptop, unable to breathe. After 22 years, they had reduced me to an obstacle, not a pillar, not a founder of the very system their success depended on, but a relic. I sat in my office in stunned silence for an hour that day, staring at the walls I'd once painted in my favorite shade of cobalt, surrounded by awards that now felt meaningless. That was the moment something inside me broke and then clicked into place. I opened a private notebook I'd kept since the early days of ClearGrid. Sketches of improved architecture, notes on increasing processing efficiency, API models they had never seen. All of it mine, and none of it created on company time. I hadn't touched the notebook in years. But that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt awake. Alive. For the next 4 weeks, I worked in silence. I started rebuilding the engine, my engine, on an isolated laptop in my home study. I rewrote core algorithms, implemented newer, lighter data compression frameworks, and cut the average processing latency in half. Night after night, I coded in the soft hum of a quiet house, while Seattle rain pattered against the window panes. Every log, every version, every timestamp meticulously backed up and documented. This wasn't just side work. This was my exit strategy. 2 weeks into the project, I realized something else. When Novaxis launched ClearGrid 6 years ago, they'd promised to file the patent on my behalf, but it never showed up in the USPTO database. I searched again. Still nothing. The company had never filed it. I confronted Marjorie in passing a few days later, feigning curiosity. By the way, do we have the ClearGrid patent certificate somewhere on file? She blinked, momentarily thrown off. Oh, the legal team handled that, I think, ages ago. I'll check. Her voice was breezy, dismissive, and very, very wrong. That night, I sent an encrypted email to Gregory Sullivan. Greg had once been my peer at a different firm, one of the few who'd treated me like an equal in the early years. Now he was the CEO of Helix Core Systems, Novaxis's fiercest competitor. He picked up after the first ring. Elaine Harper, he said, his tone warm but alert. I was wondering when I'd hear from you again. I told him everything. The email, the betrayal, the algorithm I'd just rebuilt, and the patent I intended to file, this time under my own name. Greg didn't hesitate. My legal team will handle it. Quietly. We'll make sure it's airtight. The next morning, I submitted the provisional patent. Personal device, personal email, personal documentation. Everything time-stamped, clean, and untraceable to Novaxis. Within 3 days, Greg had connected me with one of the most formidable IP attorneys in the Pacific Northwest. 2 weeks later, the full patent was filed and pending review, with priority evidence to support it. And that's when we started the real conversation. If this goes through, Greg said, I want exclusive licensing. And I want you. To do what? To lead our innovation division. You'll have full control, full credit, and a full seat at the table. I paused, not out of doubt, but out of awe. After 22 years of being talked over, overlooked, and dismissed, someone was offering me not just a position, but recognition. I'm in, I said. We agreed to keep it quiet until the patent cleared. But we both knew the timing would be perfect. Once Novaxis pushed me out, they'd assume they'd won, that I'd fade into irrelevance. But by the time they realized what I had done, it would already be too late. I wasn't just building an algorithm anymore. I was building my freedom. The restaurant was dimly lit, hushed, and elegant, the kind of place where conversations stayed private and the staff knew better than to linger. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Greg was already seated, tucked into a velvet-lined alcove behind a screen of etched glass and cherry wood. Elaine, he said, rising from his seat with a warm, knowing smile. You look like someone who's about to reclaim everything that's been taken from her. I returned the smile and slid into the seat across from him. The soft clink of polished silverware, the distant hum of jazz. It all felt almost surreal after the past few weeks. But I was exactly where I needed to be. They finally did it, I said, setting my phone down beside the untouched water glass. Friday's my last day. Greg shook his head slowly. I suspected they would. But cutting the architect of their flagship product? That's bold. I tilted my head. It's not bold. It's stupid. Victor never understood what ClearGrid really was. He saw the interface, the dashboards, the slick marketing, but the engine, the structure, the actual innovation, that was just technical stuff to him. Replaceable. Greg raised an eyebrow. Is it? Not anymore, I said, leaning back as our server approached. We ordered salmon for him, risotto for me, but neither of us were really thinking about the food. When the server disappeared again, Greg slid a sleek black folder across the table. Inside, a final licensing agreement, legal confirmations, and a job offer. Everything's ready, he said. 7-figure signing bonus, performance-based equity, and full royalties from any products that use the new algorithm. You'll lead the innovation division. Report directly to me. Total creative freedom. I reviewed the documents, slowly, methodically. Not because I hadn't read them before. I had, line by line, more than once, but because the moment demanded ceremony, precision, finality. You understand what this means, I said at last. Come Monday, Novi Access will realize they just gave away their future. They won't just realize it, Greg replied. They'll feel it. I signed the last page with a steady hand and closed the folder. There was no rush of adrenaline, no gleeful spark, just clarity. For 22 years, I had built their systems, solved their problems, mentored their talent, and watched them climb on my shoulders while calling me supporting staff. They took credit, they took power, they took space. But tonight, I took it back. To new beginnings, Greg said, raising his glass. And to owning your own value, I answered, clinking his glass gently. We talked for another hour, plans, transition strategies, discreet outreach to key team members I hoped to bring with me. Greg had already drafted offers for 6 of my engineers, each one with a generous salary bump and a seat on the next big thing. He understood loyalty not just as a business strategy, but as a principle. As we left the restaurant, rain fell in a slow mist, wrapping the city in silver. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I walked toward the car waiting at the curb. Inside the folder in my hand was not just a contract, it was proof. Proof that I had never been disposable, that innovation didn't have an expiration date, that no matter how many polished conference rooms they built at Novi Access, they had failed to secure the one thing that mattered most, me. And come Monday morning, when the press release hit, when the headlines splashed across tech news feeds, and when Victor Reynolds opened his inbox and felt his stomach drop, they would understand. They hadn't just let me go. They'd given me the opening I needed to burn everything down and rebuild it under my own name. Friday dawned gray and misty, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I arrived at Novi Access earlier than usual, walking through the glass atrium with the same steady stride I'd perfected over 2 decades. No one looked twice. Not yet. My office, corner unit, southwest view, was exactly as I'd left it. A neat row of conference badges from industry events lined the shelf. My mug, the brain behind the grid, still sat beside the keyboard. On the wall, an award plaque commemorating the launch of ClearGrid's first version gleamed faintly in the morning light. A monument to forgotten credit. I sat down and began the methodical process of extracting myself. Emails, file transfers, password logs, process documentation. Over the course of 7 hours, I compiled every scrap of institutional knowledge I held. every system, shortcut, and solution. I documented it all with surgical precision. Some would call that generous. But it wasn't kindness. It was leverage, a record that I had departed in full compliance, having given them everything they thought they wanted, while keeping what they actually needed. As I packed my personal items, I was interrupted by quiet knocks. First from administrative assistants, some offering shy goodbyes, others just sympathetic nods. Then a few junior developers, asking if I might connect on LinkedIn. I nodded, smiled, said of course. Even signed a few farewell cards. They didn't know yet, but they would. At 3 p.m., I reported to HR for my exit interview. Denise was waiting with a clipboard and a practice smile. Her tone was robotic, her questions lifted from a standard template. You understand that any intellectual property developed during your employment remains the property of Novaxis, she said, sliding a non-disclosure agreement toward me. I smiled back just as politely. Of course, anything created within the scope of my role, during company hours, using company resources. I emphasized each qualifier like a metronome. She nodded, scribbling notes. She didn't catch the nuance, but I knew someone would. And you affirm you have no copies of proprietary company information? I have taken nothing that belongs to Novaxis, I answered truthfully. The algorithm I now owned, the one that outperformed the original by 43%, was not theirs. It never had been. By late afternoon, my desk was bare. The framed photo of my team from last year's conference. The small crystal paperweight I'd been gifted by a client in year 10. The hand-signed thank you card from our first CTO long gone. I wrapped each in tissue, placed them carefully in the cardboard box HR had provided. The irony wasn't lost on me. How much care I still took for things they'd long since stopped valuing. Marjorie appeared at my door, just as I was taping the box shut. Elaine, she said, leaning on the frame like we were old friends catching up. I just wanted to make sure everything's in order for your departure. Crystal clear, I said, smoothing the tape with the side of my hand. Her gaze dropped to the award on top of the box. The one for a clear grid, the one with my name, smaller than the company's. You know, she said, voice light, these decisions are never personal. Victor feels the company needs to move in a more youthful direction. I looked up and met her eyes. I understand completely. Business is business. For a moment, something flickered behind her polished veneer, a shadow of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside quickly. After all, what could a soon-to-be unemployed 56-year-old woman possibly do? Will you be taking some time off? She asked, her tone suddenly performative, curious, almost condescending. Actually, I replied, slipping on my coat, I already have something lined up. That made her blink. Oh, that's fast. Anything interesting? A leadership position, I said, smiling as I lifted the box. I'm quite excited about it. She nodded, faltering slightly. Well, good luck with that. I nodded back. Thank you. And just like that, I walked out of Novaxis Technologies for the last time. I returned my badge at the security desk, handed off my laptop, and stepped into the elevator. As the doors slid shut, I looked up one last time at the gleaming logo above the lobby. 22 years distilled into a quiet exit and a storm they never saw coming. That night, I placed the Novaxis Award in the bottom drawer of a cabinet I rarely opened. Not out of bitterness, but because it no longer defined me. The industry would know my name soon enough. Monday morning arrived clear and sharp, the kind of Seattle day that felt like a reward. I stood by the window of my new office on the 42nd floor of HelixCore's headquarters, watching as sunlight lit up the water below. The space was sleek, minimal, powerful, floor-to-ceiling glass, a mahogany desk, and a leather chair that didn't creak when I moved. I hadn't even sat down yet when my phone buzzed. Greg's voice came through before I could say hello. It's live. At exactly 7 a.m., the press release dropped. HelixCore Systems acquires exclusive rights to revolutionary processing algorithm, appoints creator Elaine Harper as Chief Innovation Officer. Within minutes, it was everywhere. Industry newsletters, LinkedIn feeds, tech blogs. It didn't just name me as the inventor of the algorithm. It laid out in meticulous detail how Helix Core had secured the patent, how any company currently using the technology would now need to license it through us. I took a sip of coffee, real coffee, not the burnt machine sludge from Novaxis's break room, and opened the blinds fully. This was my view now. At 9:15 a.m., my phone lit up again. Miguel, my lead developer, loyal, brilliant, and very much still inside Novaxis, at least for now. Text, complete chaos here. What did you do? I smiled as I typed back. Check your personal email. All 6 of you have offers waiting. 10 seconds later, we're in. When can we start? Meanwhile, 8 miles away, the 9:30 executive meeting at Novaxis had turned into a full-blown emergency. Miguel fed me a blow-by-blow in real time. Victor showed up late. Legal and finance were waiting outside his office with the announcement already printed out. Everyone's panicking. They've pulled the dev servers. Your name's all over everything. I could see it all in my mind. Victor pacing the boardroom, slamming his fist on the table, demanding answers no one could give him. Marjorie trying to explain how they'd missed filing the patent, how they'd restructured the person who held the keys to their core product. By 10:45, Victor broke protocol and sent me an email directly. The desperation practically dripped off the screen. Subject: urgent clarification needed, Elaine. There appears to be a misunderstanding. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss. I'm confident we can resolve this amicably. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to Helix Core's legal team with the subject line, predictable. By noon, the industry was buzzing. Tech news outlets were calling it the algorithm coup. One journalist tweeted, Novaxis just handed their golden goose to the competition. Worst strategic blunder in a decade. Their stock dropped 7% by midday. Ours climbed 12%. Greg dropped by my office after lunch. You look calm. I am, I said, sliding a signed memo across my desk. This is the team structure for innovation. Miguel and the others start Monday. He nodded. They'll be thrilled. Also, Victor's tried calling 4 times. You're a very popular woman today. If he wants to talk, I said, standing and smoothing my blazer, he can go through our attorneys. As I headed toward my first all-hands meeting with Helix Core's development team, another message from Miguel buzzed in. Board just called emergency session. Victor looks like he's about to explode. P.S. We all accepted. Ready to start next week. By Tuesday, the full weight of what had happened settled across the industry. Novaxis's flagship product, ClearGrid, couldn't legally operate without my algorithm. They now faced 2 options: license the technology from Helix Core, or rebuild their core system from scratch. And building it again without my architecture, that would take years. Victor tried to save face. He held an all-hands Zoom that afternoon, assuring staff they would vigorously defend their IP rights. But the anxiety was palpable. Several employees updated their LinkedIn profiles before the call even ended. Miguel sent me a screenshot of the moment someone asked Marjorie if the company had ever actually filed the patent. Her face said it all. They cut the wrong person, Greg said in our end-of-day debrief. And now they'll pay for it. I didn't gloat, not out loud. But that night, I sat by my window with a glass of wine, watching the lights of the city flicker below. The headlines kept rolling in. The damage was spreading. Novaxis had made a fatal mistake. They'd underestimated me. They thought I'd fade, collapse, retire quietly. Instead, I reinvented everything. By Wednesday, the headlines had evolved from shocked to savage. The collapse of a titan. How Novaxis lost its soul, the woman they underestimated now owns their future. One signature, one algorithm. One mistake, I didn't have to search for them. my assistant forwarded them automatically. And while the world speculated, Noviaxis bled. Their stock had plummeted 23% since Monday morning, triggering investor alarms and boardroom reckonings. Financial analysts scrambled to calculate the cost of licensing my patent. Some estimated 8 figures annually. Others speculated that Greg wouldn't license it at all, that HelixCore planned to dominate the market while Noviaxis floundered. And all the while I remained silent. Victor sent 2 more emails. The tone shifted from authoritative to pleading. By Thursday, he looped in his legal counsel. Finally, they reached out to HelixCore's attorneys to initiate dialogue about possible licensing arrangements. We were prepared. HelixCore's legal team responded firmly, but not cruelly. The terms were clear: market rates, no exceptions, and strict licensing timelines. We weren't here for revenge. We were here for ownership and value. Meanwhile, my former team at Noviaxis was packing up their offices. Miguel texted, "They've put Marjorie on extended leave." Legal scrambling. Half the exec team is in full meltdown. Victor's locked in a conference room with outside consultants. Rumor is they're building a case to sue you. I forwarded the message to our counsel. "Let them try," came the reply. "You have timestamps, contracts, off-site logs, hardware receipts, Git history. It's airtight." I knew that, but still, the vindication ran deeper than legality. Because for years, I had watched people speak over me in meetings, take credit for my ideas, push me to the margins with phrases like fresh energy and modern vision. I was told to be grateful, to play nice, to mentor younger talent, then step aside. But now, when I spoke, entire teams listened. That afternoon, Greg knocked on my door with a quiet smile. "Early results are in. Your new architecture's already improving our platform efficiency by 51%. I blinked. 51. He nodded. "Even better than you predicted." I turned to look out the window, not because I was surprised, but because I didn't want him to see the emotion that surged behind my eyes. It wasn't pride. Not exactly. It was recognition. Real, long overdue recognition. Meanwhile, inside Noviaxis, Victor was holding yet another town hall. According to Miguel's final report, someone had asked, plainly, if the board was aware the patent had never been filed. Marjorie wasn't there to deflect. Legal tried, but the truth was too stark to spin. By Friday, HelixCore's inbox was flooded with resumes, not from interns or junior devs, but from senior staff, data architects, systems leads. People who once wouldn't return my emails were now calling me Dr. Harper and asking for 15 minutes of my time. The irony was exquisite. I didn't respond to all of them, but I read every message, every subject line that said, "I remember when," or "I should have listened when." Those who stayed silent when I was pushed out were now seeking shelter from the fire they helped spark. 1 year ago, I was asked to clean out my desk. Now, I was sitting in a corner office, reviewing product roadmaps and quarterly innovations built on the very system they dismissed. The difference? My name was on everything. Miguel and the rest of the team had already integrated seamlessly into HelixCore. During our Monday huddle, Anita, one of my former engineers, turned to me with a quiet smile. "This is what a dev meeting should feel like," she said. "At Noviaxis, we spend half the time explaining basic logic to executives who didn't understand the tech and didn't want to." I nodded. I understood exactly what she meant. I wasn't just part of the new system. I was the system. And Noviaxis? They were now a cautionary tale in boardrooms across the country. The ballroom of the National Technology Innovation Conference pulsed with quiet anticipation. Rows of executives, developers, journalists, and students filled the hall, faces lit by the soft glow of the massive stage lights. Somewhere in the crowd, I spotted a familiar silhouette, Miguel, seated beside Anita, both of them smiling up at me like proud co-conspirators. "And now," the announcer said, voice echoing across the room, "please welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Elaine Harper, Chief Innovation Officer of Helix Core Systems. Applause erupted, but I barely heard it. I stepped out into the light, and for the first time in 22 years, my name was the one being spoken. Not buried in a team slide, not footnoted in a white paper, not whispered behind closed doors. Spoken, celebrated. I stood tall behind the podium, letting the silence settle as the room grew still. The spotlight warmed my shoulders. My voice, when it came, was calm, steady, unapologetically clear. I want to talk to you about ownership, I began. Not just legal ownership, but something deeper, the right to be seen, heard, credited. I spoke of the algorithm, yes, but only briefly. The room wasn't here for code. They were here for a story. I gave them one. I talked about building things in the shadows, about being told to train your replacement, about the polite cruelty of being labeled outdated because your hair had grayed, because you no longer stayed late for drinks with the 20-somethings, because you wore flats instead of heels. I talked about watching others present your work as theirs, and staying quiet because speaking up would make you difficult. I didn't mention Noviaxis by name. I didn't need to. Everyone already knew. When I finished, the silence stretched again, longer this time. Then, wave by wave, the applause began. It didn't explode. It built. Quiet clapping turned into rising thunder. Some people stood. Others wiped their eyes. And I just stood there, letting it wash over me. Because this moment wasn't about ego. It was about arrival. That evening, at the rooftop reception, I was approached by 3 young women in their 20s, engineering students from UCLA, bright-eyed and buzzing. We just wanted to say thank you, one of them said, clutching a notebook. You made us feel like there's room for us. Not just now, but later, after. I smiled and took their hands. There's always room, I told them. You just have to hold the door open long enough. Weeks passed, then months. Helix Core released 3 new products built entirely on my architecture. Each one outperformed its Noviaxis counterpart. Our market share surged. Investor calls turned into interviews. I became, as one article put it, the woman who rewrote the rules of legacy. Inside Noviaxis, the unraveling continued. Marjorie officially resigned. Victor stepped down as CEO. Richard Donovan was brought in as interim leadership, a man with a reputation for integrity, tasked with salvaging what was left. One day, a quiet email appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple. Respectfully. It was from Richard. Dr. Harper, congratulations on your new role and all you've accomplished. Noviaxis is undergoing significant restructuring, not just in leadership, but in how we recognize contribution and innovation. Your story has forced a conversation we should have had long ago. Thank you for forcing us to listen. I didn't reply, not out of malice, but because the conversation was no longer mine to lead. I had said what I needed to say by walking away. On the anniversary of my departure, Greg knocked on my office door. He held 2 champagne flutes and a bottle wrapped in silver ribbon. Happy 1 year, he said. I laughed. Feels like 10. He poured. You've changed the company. I looked down at the quarterly innovation report on my desk, metrics climbing, morale rising, team thriving. No, I said softly, raising my glass. I just made sure no one else could change me. We toasted to survival, to strategy, to finally being seen. And as the sun sank behind the city skyline, casting golden lines across my office floor, I knew this wasn't a comeback. It was a correction,